Hey guys, it's Fate. Today I've got something a smidge different for you. We're going ahead and branching off from true and proper audiobooks. We're going to do some different audio. So shouts out to my friends Kudus and Zam for sort of jointly leading me to today's piece of media. We're checking out a narration of the left-right game by Jack Anderson, also known as Neon Tempo, and it's going to be read and narrated by Creepcast. So Creepcast is a duo of some pretty awesome creative minds. You've got Wendigoon or Isaiah Nichols, and Meat Canyon or Papa Meat or Hunter Hancock. These are two really fun guys. Wendigoon does a lot of more analytical, literary, conspiracy, and variety real-world horror type media content. And Hunter, or Meat Canyon, does some just absolutely gnarly animation and voice acting. These are two really fun guys to check out, either on their own or in their joint production of Creepcast. So what we're checking out today was something of a supernatural suspense and mystery story with a heavy dose of horror elements, I would say. It is really interesting in its dynamic range. It is not a non-stop, scared shitless type of media. It's actually very mystical and mysterious, but it's also super high stakes and very, very gruesome at times. So I would say, of course, with that, there's your typical content warnings. If you're more sensitive to things like violence or high stakes, anxiety, things like that, you may just want to steer clear of the left-right game. But this particular reading and production involved with the left-right game might be one of the better ones to check out. So throughout this narration, it is a few things that are wildly different from an audiobook. We're talking things like a lot of quirky and kooky voice acting, tons of first take or only take type production, whereas many audiobooks will re-record and polish up lines like no other. There's also just so much banter between these two, which even in audiobook productions with dozens of voice actors on a full-fledged cast, you may only get the banter, the very specific banter that is written in between the characters, whereas we're getting a very personal and very organic type of banter with these two gentlemen. They very much play off of each other to a great strength. Hunter, or Meat Canyon, is extremely zany and quirky and does not seem to be the most involved in dissecting the literature and hanging on to every last hook, every last hidden detail, Easter egg, foreshadowing piece, etc. Whereas Isaiah, or Wendigoon, he's a lot more interested in that aspect, I would say, and he's not giving the most crazy voice actings and the most insane readings of lines. And I actually went ahead and checked out some of their earlier production in a reading of a creepypasta called Pen Pal. Very different from Left Right Game, and honestly a lot more bleak and disheartening and unsettling. Would not recommend it as quickly as a reading of Left Right Game, just due to how much more gravity there is in that one. But that was an earlier production of theirs, and you could tell they're still sort of finding the best way for them to read these, the best and most smoothly flowing production. In the production that we had with the Left-Right Games reading, we have Isaiah, or Wendigoon, more commonly reading the prose, the base narration, and then voicing one character, and it was a type of voicing that went to his strengths, whereas with Meat or Hancock, we're going crazy with eccentric voice actings, tons of emotional and contextually driven readings of the dialogue, the lines themselves. Anything that's in quotes is kind of the joke, as long as it's not for the character Rob or the ferryman. So, all in all, there were aspects to this that I loved and aspects to this that I had to really adjust to, and I want to warn you about them. If you're coming over to a reading like this from a stint or binge of 25 audiobooks marathoned over the last half a year, be ready for some changes and try to welcome them, because they're also fun in their own way. These two gentlemen are so good at deflating their own tension. They're building up the tension through their reading and through the text itself. They will often deflate that. They crack tons of jokes. They play off of each other's jokes. They follow a bit down into a tangent lasting several minutes long, and I welcome it. But at first, I was very skeptical as to whether I would enjoy it. And I even questioned if I wanted to just set what they had down and go pick up a more serious reading to get the actual story under my belt and then come back to their reading of it. Ultimately, that's just a personal choice, and I stuck with theirs. I stuck with the Creepcast reading of Left Right Game, and I'm glad I did, because it helped me keep a door to a different type of narration, a different type of analysis open. Speaking of analysis, another thing that you may have to get used to is that you're not going to be the only one speculating on each piece of foreshadowing. You're not going to be the only one making your own theory as to what is going to happen next. No, these gentlemen definitely go ahead and take that liberty just as well, and they share it with you. They are really communicative in their own speculations as to where a story seems to be going, and they're very speculative into what pieces of foreshadowing may have meant or may mean in the present time of the story. And likewise, they're constantly sharing their feelings with you, at least to a great degree. Perhaps not every last fiber of what they feel about the story, but far more than you would get with any typical audiobook reading. Getting feelings about characters, the sort of reader opinion of the characters, as well as various aspects like where we think the justification came from for certain characters to behave in certain ways. And it's interesting because that type of thing, if you're completely going into a piece of literature alone, that's the type of thing that you do when you quote-unquote digest the piece of literature. You're going to be ruminating on, meditating on, and reflecting on what you read. Well, these guys are doing that very vocally in real time, and it almost leaves no necessary time for afterthoughts and reflections at the end of their readings. I've noticed that they do leave a little bit of time for that type of thing, but they don't end up ever having to get terribly invested in it, because it's kind of like a clean as you go. They're really constantly picking up after themselves in terms of thoughts and speculations and emotions and the feelings that the writing and the imagery is giving them. It's really different pacing, but it's also something that I would say you shouldn't ever try to make yourself a foreigner to, a total outlier and outcast to this type of media consumption. For someone like myself that has no sort of literature buddy community, it was actually very cathartic and fun to hear them go ahead and really chum it up and really talk through their feelings and reflection of different pieces of media that they had acquainted themselves with, as well as different pieces that they had tackled together. So I love what you guys are doing over on Creepcast. Just a personal message to you. Thank you so much for making a very unique experience for me. And thank you to my friends for suggesting that. Given how fun and unique of an experience this is, I wouldn't want to rate it as you would rate an audiobook narration. I wouldn't want to do that one bit, because they're going for something different. They're different sorts of productions and they accomplish different jobs. But across the board, I felt like a high B to an A. And had I completely adapted to this type of reading and not gone in with such a jagged and abrupt change, it probably would be solidly in an A, or, just throwing out S's all the time, right? And that's about it for my review of the reading and the narration. Loved that. So moving on there, we also had the story itself. Story of, has anyone heard of the left-right game, which is often just truncated to the left-right game. So we've got in this story a cast of characters, the ever-helpful journalist protagonist, which I think is quite the trope, but it's good because journalists, when they're fleshed out human beings, do make for some really great and observant protagonists or main characters within a mystery or suspense and drama type of setting or type of literature. So I appreciate that, as much as it may feel a little bit played out. We've got a handful of other characters. I'd say possibly our deuteragonist is a Vietnam vet gentleman, old divorcee type of guy. And then there are several other characters that reflect pretty wildly off of this, pretty varietally, if you will. We have a skeptic, we have just a random dude bro, an old sibling couple, if you will, old sibling duo. Likewise, a sort of halfway journalistic, halfway vlogger gal pal duo. The characters within this story were either extremely lovable or almost odious, and that was actually great breadth. We had just a couple potentially odious characters, and then a great deal of lovable, believable characters who had different motivations and had different reasons for being there and different reasons for their actions. A lot of mystery and a lot of similarity to various pieces of essentially modern folklore, urban legend type of writing and story sharing. I remember learning a good deal about the presence and the significance of hitchhikers in myths. And ever since I was taught about that, and having been a hitchhiker myself a few dozen times, I really loved that there was a very significant hitchhiking character in this story. And that's a total personal bias type thing formed by my experiences, but there were various other aspects, a feeling of rules and a necessity to follow them, and a mysticism and a lack of clarity as to why the rules exist, why they are so significant, and why it matters to follow them or not. That type of thing is not only touched on by our narrators, but I think just ingrained in human nature to be sort of fun and refreshing. I think in a world full of dozens of massively populated and participated in creeds and beliefs and superstitions and so on, to have one present where finally you get the validation of some very real consequences for either adhering to or abandoning the rules, there's something beautiful and whimsical and terrifying and unique about that, and it's a great piece of writing device to flesh a story out from. Of course, being a quasi-horror piece of literature, we're having characters get picked off left and right. We're losing cast members, if you will, and it is supposed to be a sort of one-shot novelita-length story or something to that effect. I would say even without the gags and quips from the guys, it's probably in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 hours of narration, which would put it essentially below the length of like a standard mystery novel. That being the case, and being the fact that this is supposed to be a sort of one-and-done story, just done for the sake of quality and open-endedness, I can appreciate the fact that we start with a sizable cast and it dwindles. Very few new characters are really introduced and fleshed out, and so there's this feeling of desolation and isolation that forms throughout this kind of story. And I can really respect and appreciate that there were various aspects to the callbacks, the foreshadowing, the justification. It just felt that there were very few loose ends or pieces of worthless prose or unnecessary detail for detail's sake throughout this piece of writing, which is actually something very nice to be able to grab and take hold of when it comes to a more independent type of writing whose debut is just a post on a subreddit. That's a really lovely feeling. Just the refreshingness of a really well cleaned up and significant and substantial piece of indie literature, if you will. So, all of that being said, I really enjoyed the left-right game, and I would say don't be terribly shocked if I check out the more cleaned up and perhaps serious plain Jane narration of it in the future. I wouldn't even say that there's anything boring or blasé about that. It's just a very different type of narration of the left-right game by Q Code Media. We'll check that out one day, I'm sure, and put it on the channel, because I'd love to revisit something like the left-right game, both in its convenient length and just the sheer fun of it. I implore you to go check out Left-Right Game. And if you want something a bit more lighthearted, something that's perhaps going to make you smile as well as feel tense, laugh as well as feel dread, etc., I would actually very strongly recommend just going right to our Creepcast reading here, because it did an awesome job of that. Loved it, you guys. I can't wait to get a chance to check out some more suggestions. I believe one of the next ones we have is a Gears of War novel suggested by my friend Monty. It's going to be the first one. That's about it for today, though, everyone. I would love if you would like this video and subscribe if you want to check out more. Comment if you have any suggestions and why you love those pieces of literature. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.